The alien ship floated in the endless black ocean of space. Its lights were dim, its engines dead, its metal walls cold like ice. Every corridor echoed with silence, broken only by the faint breath of survivors who huddled together. Once, this ship carried hope, soldiers, and dreams of victory. But now it was nothing more than a ghost drifting between stars. Inside, the survivors whispered in fear. They had no food left, only a few drops of water. And the air was running out. Their captain was missing. Lost in the chaos when the enemy attacked, the crew looked at one another with wide, hopeless eyes. They believed no one would come. No rescue, no signal, only slow death in the dark. The youngest alien among them, with trembling hands, asked in a low voice, "Are we already dead?" No one answered, because deep inside, they all felt the same. The silence of space pressed against their hearts, making them feel smaller than dust. Every second stretched like an eternity. Every sound of metal creaking felt like the whisper of doom. Far outside, beyond the shattered hull, the stars shone cold and merciless. Each star looked like an eye watching their suffering. The survivors thought the galaxy had forgotten them. They were just another lost ship, another forgotten tragedy. But then, something happened. The old radar system, barely alive, began to blink. At first, the crew thought it was a mistake, a glitch, nothing real. Yet the signal grew stronger, repeating. Like a heartbeat, one alien leaned closer to the console and gasped. "It is a human signal." Fear mixed with confusion spread among them. Humans were strange to them, reckless, stubborn, impossible creatures. Most of the crew had only heard stories of humans fighting when no one else dared. Stories of humans surviving things that should have killed them. Some believed those were only myths, legends told by soldiers to inspire courage. But now, in the middle of empty space, with death waiting outside, a human signal pulsed like hope itself. The aliens looked at each other, their eyes wide. Could it be real? Someone whispered, "Or is it a trap?" Asked another. They had no choice, because the void was already killing them. So they waited, trembling, while the radar beeped louder and louder. Minutes felt like hours. The silence grew heavier. Then the sound came, metal scraping against the hull. The crew froze, their hearts beating fast. Something was docking with their ship, something alive. The door hissed open with a long, slow sound. From the shadows stepped a figure in heavy armor, breathing steady through a cracked helmet. It was tall, scarred, and unmistakably human. The aliens gasped, some stepping back in fear, some leaning forward in disbelief. The human stood in the doorway like a ghost from their legends, eyes sharp, shoulders heavy with unseen battles. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the human's voice broke the silence, calm but strong. "I will not let you die out here." The words echoed through the room, simple words, but filled with power. The survivors felt something they had not felt in many days, hope. Their eyes lit up, their hearts beat faster. Maybe, just maybe, they would live. The youngest alien whispered, Why would a human come here, alone?" No answer came, not yet. But deep inside, they all knew. This was not a simple rescue. This was the beginning of something much greater. For in the cold silence of abandoned space, a human warrior had arrived. And with him came the promise of survival, the promise of defiance, and the spark of a story that the galaxy would never forget. The survivors stared at the figure in the doorway, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had heard tales of human soldiers, fighters who refused to surrender, warriors who kept standing even when the universe turned against them. But they never thought they would see one with their own eyes, especially here, in the middle of nowhere, drifting between life and death. The human warrior stepped forward, the sound of his boots echoing on the broken floor. His armor was scratched and burned, marked with battles long past, yet he moved with steady strength. The cracked visor of his helmet reflected the dim lights of the alien ship, and when his face appeared, scarred and tired, the crew felt both fear and awe. This was no ordinary Soldier, this was a survivor. No one dared to speak at first. The silence was heavy, like space itself was holding its breath. Finally, the human raised one hand slowly, not in threat but in peace. I came because I heard your signal, he said, his voice low but strong. And I will not let you die here. The aliens exchanged nervous glances, unsure if they should trust him. Humans were unpredictable, known to fight against impossible odds, but also to take risks no other species dared. Some aliens believed humans were cursed by chaos, always running toward danger instead of away from it. Yet in this moment, when death surrounded them, the presence of this lone warrior felt like a miracle. One alien captain, her eyes hollow with exhaustion, finally stepped forward. Our ship is dying, she whispered. The engines are gone, supplies are gone, and something hunts us in the dark halls. The human's eyes narrowed slightly at her words. He turned his head, scanning the broken ship, listening to the distant creaks and shivers of metal. It was as if he could sense the hidden danger, as if he had already faced something like this before. Then we move fast, the human replied, his tone sharp and commanding. We fix what can be fixed, and we fight what must be fought. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of certainty. The aliens felt a spark of strength return to them, like his will was reaching into their tired bones. For the first time since the attack, they believed survival might be possible. He removed a pack from his back and placed it on the floor. Inside were tools, ration bars, and strange human devices the aliens had never seen before. They watched as he began to repair broken panels with fast, sure movements. Every motion showed experience, not just of war, but of survival in places no one else dared to go. The crew whispered among themselves, wondering what kind of man this was, why he had come alone. Then came the sound, a low scrape, like claws dragging across the walls, echoing through the corridors. The aliens froze, their eyes wide, their breathing shallow. The youngest one trembled, whispering, "It's here. It's back." But the human warrior did not flinch. Instead, he calmly drew a weapon from his side, a blade that shimmered faintly in the weak light, and a compact gun strapped to his other hand. His voice was quiet but certain. "Stay behind me." The crew moved closer together, huddling behind the human as the sound grew louder. Closer, crawling through the shadows of the ship, the air grew heavy, filled with dread. But the human stood firm, his eyes sharp, his body steady like a wall between the survivors and the unseen danger. Suddenly, a shadow flickered at the far end of the corridor. A shape moved quickly, then vanished again. The aliens gasped, but the human only adjusted his stance, his grip on the blade tightening. "Whatever hunts you," he said, his voice calm as stone, "it will not take you tonight." The survivors felt their fear shift into something else. Hope. It was strange, almost unbelievable, that one human standing alone could make them believe in life again. But in that moment, under the broken lights and the endless dark of space, they realized this warrior was not ordinary. He was something rare, something dangerous, and perhaps something the universe itself could not crush. The scrape came again, louder, closer, the walls trembling with the weight of whatever monster lurked within. The aliens clutched each other, waiting for the attack, but the human smiled faintly, a small scar pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Good," he whispered, as if welcoming the fight. And in that moment, the crew understood why humans were feared. Not because they were the strongest, not because they were the fastest, but because they did not break. Even when abandoned, even when hopeless, they stood and fought. And now, in this ship lost to the dark, their only chance of survival was the warrior who had just arrived. The ship was too quiet. Silence wrapped around every corridor like a trap. Even the faint hum of failing systems seemed to vanish, leaving only the sound of breath, heartbeat, and fear. The survivors followed the human warrior through the dim corridors, their steps slow, their voices gone. Every shadow looked alive. Every flicker of light felt like watching eyes. The air smelled of burned wires and old blood. It was the smell of a grave in space. The human walked in front, blade in one hand, compact gun in the other. His movements were sharp, precise, like a predator ready to strike. He did not waste energy on fear. He listened, always listening. Every sound, every vibration, every whisper of metal carried meaning to him. The aliens wondered if he could truly sense the unseen threat before it attacked. Then, the sound returned, the same scraping noise, claws dragging along the walls. Slow and deliberate, it came from the left, then the right, then behind them, circling, hunting. The youngest survivor whimpered, his voice trembling. "It's playing with us." The human did not answer, but his jaw tightened. He already knew. They reached a junction, 2 corridors stretching into darkness. The captain whispered, "Which way?" The human raised a finger to his lips, commanding silence. Then he crouched low, touching the floor with his hand, feeling the faint vibrations. When he stood, his voice was calm, almost cold. "It is in front of us," as if summoned by his words. The lights above flickered and died. The survivors gasped, swallowed by complete blackness. Only the faint glow of the human's visor lit the space around them. A growl echoed from the dark, deep and alien. The survivors froze, their bodies stiff with terror. Something was moving fast, crawling across the ceiling. The human's voice cut through the fear like a blade. "Stay low, stay quiet." Then a loud crash shook the corridor. Sparks burst from the walls. A massive shadow leapt from above, slamming into the floor with claws that tore through metal like paper. The alien screamed, but the human moved faster. His blade sliced through the dark, striking against hard armor. The creature screeched, the sound so sharp it rattled their bones. In the dim sparks they saw it, long limbs, armored skin, eyes burning red like fire. It was not just hunting them, it was enjoying their fear. The human fought without hesitation, each move clean and deadly. Gunfire lit the darkness in quick flashes, each shot followed by the roar of the beast. The survivors pressed against the walls, watching in shock. They had never seen such speed, such focus. The human was not only fighting, he was studying the creature, learning with every strike. Every block, every dodge was a test, and with each passing second, his confidence grew. The beast lunged, claws swiping, jaws snapping. The human slid to the side, his blade cutting deep into its leg. It howled, the sound shaking the entire corridor. The survivors covered their ears, trembling. But when they looked up, they saw the human standing tall, eyes locked on the enemy. There was no fear in him, only defiance. The monster slammed into him, throwing him back against the wall. Metal bent and sparks rained down. The aliens cried out, thinking he was finished. But the human pushed himself back to his feet, blood on his face, fire in his eyes. He spat on the floor and raised his blade again. "You'll need more than claws to kill me," he growled. The creature hissed, retreating into the shadows, its red eyes vanishing one by one. The corridor went silent again. But the silence was worse than the noise. It was still there, waiting, watching, learning just as he had. The human wiped the blood from his brow and turned to the crew. His voice was low but firm. This was only a test. It was never trying to kill us yet. It was studying us. The aliens shivered, realizing the truth. They were not hunters in this ship, they were prey, and the human warrior was the only one keeping them alive. The youngest whispered, "Why do you not fear it?" The human looked at the child, his expression unreadable. "Because fear is useless," he said. "I only believe in what I can do with my hands, my mind and my will." The survivors looked at him with awe. In their eyes, he was more than a man. He was a shield against the darkness, a fire in the void. And yet, deep inside, even the human knew this fight was far from over. The beast was clever, patient, and relentless. The real battle had not yet begun, and as the ship creaked and shivered around them, the survivors understood one terrifying truth: they were trapped inside with something far worse than death. But as long as the human warrior walked among them, They still had a chance, a small chance, fragile but real. And in the endless dark of space, sometimes one chance was enough. Asterisk. The survivors gathered in the dim control room. The flickering light of broken screens painted their faces with pale shadows. For the first time since the human warrior arrived. The ship felt almost calm. The monster had retreated into the dark halls. But its presence was still heavy, like smoke that never left. The crew sat in silence, whispering only with their eyes. They were exhausted, hungry, and afraid. Yet their attention kept drifting back to the human. He was leaning against the wall, sharpening his blade with slow, careful strokes. Every movement made a soft scrape, a steady rhythm that filled the silence. Finally, the captain spoke, her voice low. "You fight like someone who has done this before," she said. The human did not look up, his eyes fixed on the blade. "I have," he replied simply. The youngest alien, curiosity stronger than fear, leaned forward. "Why?" he asked. "Why risk your life for us?" "You do not even know us." The human paused, the blade catching the faint light. For a moment, he seemed far away, lost in memory. Then he said, "Because once I was abandoned too." The room grew even quieter. The survivors leaned closer, drawn by the weight of his words. The human set the blade down and finally lifted his eyes. There was pain there, but also fire. A story lived in those scars, waiting to be told. "I was a soldier," he began, his voice steady but heavy. "My unit was sent to hold a colony world, a place everyone else had already given up on." He looked around the room, his gaze sharp, making sure they understood. No reinforcements, no chance of survival. We were sent to die slowly, to buy time for others. The survivors exchanged glances, their hearts tightening. The human continued, his tone calm but full of buried rage. "We fought until the sky burned, until the ground was nothing but ash." He drew a slow breath, his hand clenching into a fist. "One by one, my brothers and sisters fell, but still we fought. Because humans, we do not know how to stop." The crew felt a chill at his words. They could see it in his eyes, the memory of fire, blood, and endless screams. But there was something else in his voice, defiance, the kind of defiance that made him stand here, now facing death again without fear. "I was left behind," he said, his voice dropping lower. "They thought I was dead, buried under ruins, but I crawled out, broken and alone." The youngest alien gasped softly. The human looked at him, his expression hard but honest. "I survived because I refused to give the enemy my death. I refused to give the void my silence. I chose to live when everything told me I should die." The survivors were silent, their eyes locked on him. Even the captain lowered her head, humbled by the weight of his story. For them, survival had been a curse, a slow death in space. But for him, survival was a choice. An act of defiance. He leaned forward, his voice sharper now, cutting through the gloom. "You ask why I fight for you, strangers I do not know. The answer is simple." His gaze burned like fire. "Because I know what it feels like to be left behind, forgotten, waiting for death, and I swore that if I could stand again, I would never let another soul suffer the same." The words struck the survivors like lightning. They felt their fear bend, reshape, turn into something else: respect. The youngest whispered, almost in awe, "You are not just a soldier, you are something more." The human gave a faint smile, though it carried no joy. "No," he said, "I am only human, and that is enough." The silence that followed was not heavy like before. It was filled with a strange new energy. The survivors looked at one another with new courage in their eyes. The human story was not just his, it had become theirs too. A reminder that even in the darkest void, fire could still burn. But then, from the far corridor, came the sound, a low scrape. Slow and mocking, the creature had returned. The survivors tensed, their hope tested again. The human picked up his blade, standing tall. His voice was steady, almost calm. "Good," he said. "Let it come. I've told you my past. Now I will show you why I survived it." The crew's hearts pounded. torn between fear and belief. The monster was close, and the human was ready, in the silence before the storm. The survivors realized one truth. They were no longer waiting for death. They were waiting for a fight, and with a human warrior leading them, maybe, just maybe they had a chance. The ship shivered like a dying beast. Metal groaned, pipes rattled, sparks fell from broken wires. The survivors huddled in the corridor, their eyes wide, their breaths shallow. And then came the sound again, closer, sharper, hungrier, claws on. Steel, scrape, scrape. The monster was no longer hiding, it was hunting openly. The air grew heavy, filled with the stench of something wild and cruel. The aliens clutched each other, trembling. But the human warrior only tightened his grip on his blade. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice low, calm, unshaken. His boots echoed against the floor as he stepped forward, placing himself between the crew and the dark corridor ahead. Every muscle in his body was tense, ready. The survivors saw him not as a man, but as a wall of iron. Then it came. The monster leapt from the shadows with a scream that shook the walls. Its limbs stretched wide, claws gleaming, red eyes burning like fire. The survivors screamed, ducking low. But the human did not move back. He charged forward. The clash was thunder. Blade against claw, sparks exploding, metal ringing like a bell. The beast swung with savage strength, tearing chunks of wall with every strike. But the human blocked, dodged, countered, his movements sharp and precise. Every strike of his blade was aimed to test, to learn to break the creature piece by piece. Gunfire flashed, quick bursts of light. Each shot punched into the monster's armored hide, forcing it back. But the beast roared and lunged again, faster, angrier. Its tail whipped through the air, smashing the console into pieces. The survivors cried out. But the human only pressed forward, his jaw set, his eyes blazing. The fight moved through the corridor like a storm. Metal bent, sparks flew, walls shattered. The human slid under the beast's strike, blade slicing across its leg. The monster screamed, blood spraying black and thick. But it did not fall. It grew more furious. The captain shouted, "We cannot win, we must run." But the human's voice cut through the chaos. "No, if we run, it will tear you apart. It must fall here." His tone was unshakable, his will stronger than steel. The aliens stared in disbelief, one human against a monster that should not even exist. And yet, he fought like he had been born for this moment. The beast lunged again, claws raking, jaws snapping. The human twisted, rolling to the side, his blade driving deep into its chest. The creature shrieked, slamming him against the wall with brutal force. Blood spilled from his lip, his visor cracked, his breath ragged. But still he rose, still he stood. The survivors gasped, unable to understand. How could he still fight? The human wiped blood from his face, his eyes burning with defiance. "Come on," he growled at the beast. "Try harder," the monster roared. Slamming forward, the two forces collided again, claw against steel, gun against hide, will against hunger. The survivors felt the corridor shake, the air burn, the ground tremble beneath them. Fear gripped their hearts. But alongside it came something else, a spark of courage, a belief that maybe survival was possible. Because if one human could stand against such terror, maybe they too could endure. The youngest alien whispered, "He fights like death cannot touch him." The captain answered softly, "No. He fights because death already tried and failed." The battle raged on. The human's blade found weak spots, carving lines of blood into the monster's armor. Each strike slower, heavier, but still true. The beast staggered, howling, but still it fought. It slammed him to the floor, claws descending. The crew cried out, certain it was over, but the human rolled, twisting, firing his weapon point blank into its throat. The blast lit the corridor like lightning. The beast screamed, thrashing wildly, its claws ripping through walls. The human climbed back to his feet, swaying but unbroken, His blade raised once more. Then silence. The creature had vanished into the dark again, retreating, bleeding, but not defeated. The human lowered his weapon slowly. His chest rising and falling, the survivors rushed to him, their eyes wide, their voices trembling. "You fought it back," the captain whispered. "You saved us." The human looked at her, his expression unreadable. "No," he said quietly. "It is not over. It is waiting, learning, and it will come again." The words chilled them all. But deep inside, they also felt a strange, powerful certainty. If death itself returned, the human would stand against it. And as long as he stood, maybe they still had a chance. The ship was dying. Engines roared with broken voices. Alarms screamed through the halls, red lights flashing. Like the heartbeat of a dying beast, every corridor shook, every wall trembled, pieces of steel raining from above. The end was coming fast. The survivors ran, stumbling, clutching each other as the ground tilted under their feet. Smoke filled the air, choking, blinding. Some cried, some prayed, some whispered final words to no one. But one figure stood apart, unmoving, unafraid. The human warrior. He stood in the center of the chaos, blade in hand, gun ready, eyes sharp as fire. His armor was cracked, his face streaked with blood and sweat, but his stance was unbroken. He watched the corridor ahead, waiting, knowing. The scrape came, louder than ever. The monster was not hiding anymore. It was coming with fury, with hunger, with purpose. The walls shook as it moved, claws dragging deep scars into the floor. The survivors froze, terror locking their legs. But the human stepped forward. "Go," he said, his voice calm but heavy. The captain stared at him, shaking her head. "No, we cannot leave you," she cried. He turned, eyes hard, voice like iron. "If you stay, you die. If you run, you live. This is the only way." The survivors hesitated, torn between fear and loyalty. But the ship groaned louder. Fire bursting from broken panels. There was no time left. The human's voice thundered above the chaos. "Move," and so they ran, their footsteps echoing down the broken hall. The youngest alien looked back, tears in his eyes. The last thing he saw was the human warrior standing tall, blade raised, waiting in the storm of smoke and sparks. Then the monster came. It burst from the darkness, a massive shadow of claws and teeth, red eyes blazing like firestorms. The walls shattered as it smashed through, roaring with fury. The human did not flinch. He roared back, charging forward. The clash was an explosion, steel against claw, fire against shadow, will against rage. The ship shook under their battle, sparks raining like burning stars. The human struck hard, blade carving through armor, gunfire blasting holes into its hide. But the monster was stronger now, faster, more desperate. It slammed him into the wall, claws raking. He bled, but still he fought. Every strike cost him, every movement burned his strength. Yet he refused to fall. His eyes burned with defiance, his body broken but unyielding. The monster hissed, jaws snapping. The human shoved his blade deep into its chest, twisting with all his power. The beast shrieked, shaking the walls, black blood pouring. But still it lived. The ship roared, the floor splitting, flames rushing through the corridors. The human knew the truth. Neither he nor the monster could leave alive if this fight continued. But the survivors could, and that was enough. He pushed the beast back with a final strike, staggering into the center of the collapsing hall. The monster snarled, circling. The human lifted his blade high, blood dripping, his voice strong, even. As his breath failed, "You want me," he shouted. "Then come and take me." The beast lunged, a blur of claws and teeth. The human met it head on. The collision was thunder, shaking the ship apart. Steel split, fire roared. The ship screamed as if alive. The survivors, far down the escape route, felt the shock wave behind them. They turned, tears in their eyes. The human's battle echoed. In their hearts, the captain whispered, "He fights alone so we may live." the youngest sobbed. He cannot win. But the oldest survivor shook his head. No, he has already won. He gave us time, he gave us hope. Even if he falls, he has beaten the void. Behind them, the roar of the beast mixed with the roar of the warrior. A storm of fury and defiance. The walls collapsed, fire swallowed the corridor, and then, silence, the survivors reached the escape pod. Collapsing inside, the captain slammed the controls, tears burning her eyes. The pod launched. Flying away from the dying ship, they looked back through the small window. The ship burned, breaking apart, swallowed by the endless dark. They held one another, trembling, hearts broken. Was he gone? Was the human warrior lost forever in the fire and shadows? The question cut deep, but even in their grief, one truth remained. Because of him, they lived. Because of him, they carried a story that would never die. The escape pod drifted into the endless black. The survivors sat in silence, their bodies shaking, their eyes filled with tears. Behind them, the alien ship was nothing but fire and shadows, breaking apart into the void. Every explosion echoed. In their hearts, each burst of light a reminder of the warrior left behind. The youngest alien pressed his face against the window, refusing to blink. He is still there, he whispered, his voice trembling. But the others shook their heads, grief heavy in their chests. No one could survive that. The captain said softly, not even him. Yet even as she spoke, she did not fully believe her own words. The human was not like anyone else. He was different, unyielding, and deep inside. A spark of hope still burned in them all. The pod floated in silence, engines weak, systems flickering. The survivors whispered prayers to stars that did not listen. Then, suddenly the radar beeped, a faint signal, small, broken, but alive. The crew gasped, their hearts racing. Impossible, the captain whispered, leaning over the console. But the signal grew stronger, pulsing like a heartbeat. It was him. Through the window of the pod they saw it. A small craft breaking through the debris, smoke trailing, metal shattered. Inside, barely holding on, was the human warrior. His ship was broken, his body bloodied, but his eyes still burned like fire. He had survived. He had defied the void. The survivors cried out in disbelief, their voices shaking with joy. He lives, the youngest shouted. He lives. The pod's lights blinked as the human's craft drew closer. Through the cracked glass of his cockpit, they saw his face, scarred and pale, but alive. And when he lifted his hand in salute, the crew felt their hearts ignite. He opened a channel, his voice rough, weak, but steady. You are safe, he said. I told you I would not let you die. The captain's eyes filled with tears. You should be dead, she whispered. How did you survive? The human gave a faint, tired smile. Because I refused to stop, he answered. Because I am human. The survivors bowed their heads, not in sorrow but in respect. They had seen him fight the impossible, bleed against the void, stand when no one else could. And now, as they floated together in the dark, they understood the truth. Humans were not strong because of their bodies, not invincible because of weapons. They were strong because they refused to break. They were strong because they always stood again. The youngest alien, his eyes wide with awe, whispered softly, He is not just a warrior, he is a light in the dark. The captain nodded, her voice steady now, and that light saved us all. As their pod drifted toward safety, carried by faint thrusters and fragile hope, the survivors knew their story would be told across the stars. The story of the night they were abandoned in space, hunted in shadows, forgotten by the galaxy, and the story of the human warrior who came alone, who stood against the impossible, who saved them when no one else would. They would tell their children, and their children's children, that in the cold silence of space, when death was certain, a human defied the odds, that courage can burn brighter than fear, that hope can survive even in the endless dark, and that sometimes all it takes is one person, one warrior, to change fate itself. The human sat in his broken craft, blood dripping down his face, but his eyes stared forward. Unyielding, he had survived once more, and as long as he drew breath, no one under his watch would ever be abandoned again. The void had tried to claim him, the monster had tried to break him, the universe had tried to bury him, but he was still here, still standing, still human, and in that moment, drifting among stars, the survivors understood one truth that would echo forever. They were not just saved, they were saved by a human who defied the odds.